Welcome to English BookCast.
Oh, fantastic.
Today we'll be taking a deep dive into Barbara Simon's The 10 Tribes of Israel Historically Identified. It's a fascinating exploration of a topic that has intrigued historians and theologians for centuries.
You got that right. And from the get-go, listeners should know that Simon's approach relies heavily on this kind of comparative method,
Absolutely.
looking for those echoes and similarities across really different cultures and historical periods.
Precisely. So if you enjoy those aha moments, those connections that illuminate history in unexpected ways, this one's for you. And if you're digging this deep dive into history and its mysteries, consider subscribing to the English BookCast channel. It really helps us grow and bring these discussions to a wider audience.
Yeah, spread the word. Now, to get started, let's talk about this idea of prophetic naming in ancient Israel. How does Simon present this concept?
Well, she suggests that names back then, they weren't just labels, They often carried this sense of destiny, a sort of foreshadowing of the individual or tribe's future.
Right, like a blueprint almost.
Exactly.
And Simon uses the blessings of Jacob and Moses as prime examples, where those pronouncements seem to set a course for the future, almost shaping it through those very words.
So it wasn't just a nice sentiment, it was almost like a divine decree embedded in the name. Pretty powerful stuff.
Definitely.
Now, moving on, Simon tackles a question that has puzzled many. Why did Noah curse Canaan specifically? What's the text's take on this?
Well, the text suggests that Noah, possibly through some kind of divine insight,
Yeah.
he saw this rebellious streak in Cush's lineage. These descendants, they would eventually settle in Canaan.
Right.
And this rebellion is presented as this turning away from the Creator, embracing celestial worship, idolatry, that sort of thing. So the curse on Canaan is presented not as random punishment, but as a consequence of this foreseen spiritual trajectory.
Like a preemptive judgment based on a perceived spiritual path. It adds a whole new dimension to that story, doesn't it?
For sure.
Now, Simon also delves into the idea of Canaan as the Lord's inheritance. What's the significance of this designation?
This concept is crucial. It really underpins the whole relationship between God, the land, and the people of Israel as Simon depicts it. The text is very explicit about this. Canaan wasn't just any territory. It belonged to the Lord.
So it was set apart.
Exactly. Statements like, the Lord's portion is his people, Israel is the lot of his inheritance, and unto thee will I give the land of Canaan, the lot of your inheritance, really drive this point home.
It's like a deed, a divine deed to the land.
Yes, and David reinforces this when he describes Judah as God's sanctuary and Israel as his dominion. And then there's this bold declaration, the land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine. So the Israelites weren't just living there, they were stewards of this sacred land, entrusted to them by God himself.
So it's not just a geographical inheritance, it's this profound spiritual bond.
Absolutely.
Now, the text also mentions the Tower of Babel and the subsequent division of the earth. How does Simon incorporate this into the narrative?
The Tower of Babel. Simon uses this as a kind of foundational event for understanding how different groups came to inhabit specific parts of the world. The story of its destruction, attributed to whirlwinds in some traditions, and then the division of the earth in Peleg's time.
Right.
This kind of sets the stage, for the dispersal of people and maybe even offers some clues about where these lost tribes might have ended up.
Like an ancient migration map.
Exactly.
Okay. Then we have Abraham's calling from Ur of the Chaldees. Why is this relevant to the 10 tribes?
Well, Abraham's journey from Ur, it's portrayed as this pivotal moment. He's like the, I guess you could say, the federal head, right?
Yeah.
The progenitor of a people destined to bless all of humanity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's this promise that in whom all the families of the earth should be blessed. So he's not just the father of the Israelites, but a figure with this universal significance.
A universal destiny. Wow.
And Simon uses this to suggest that even in their dispersal, the scattered tribes could still play a role in fulfilling this grand promise.
So the scattering itself becomes part of this universal blessing.
Right.
Fascinating. Now, one of the core themes is this prophecy about Israel's dispersal and eventual return. What are the key points Simon highlights?
So Simon leans heavily on Hosea's prophecy. It really paints this vivid picture of Israel's unfaithfulness and the resulting period of judgment. It's described as a time without a king, without rulers, without sacrifices, without their sacred images and objects,
Yeah.
all the trappings of their religious and political structure.
It's like a total dismantling of their national identity.
Yeah, precisely. But it's not the end. Hosea also predicts a return. He says, "Afterward shall the children of Israel return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days." It's this amazing interplay of judgment and enduring love. The idea that God's love persists despite their failings.
So there's this thread of hope woven throughout.
Yes, and it's beautifully captured in this powerful phrase. "Go still love a woman who is beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress, according to the love of the Lord toward the children of Israel, who look to other gods and love their grape offerings." It really drives home that unwavering love, that longing for reconciliation.
It's a powerful message. Now, how does Simon connect the concept of the Redeemer's victory to this idea of dispersal and return?
Well, Simon presents the Redeemer's victory as the ultimate triumph, the undoing of those consequences of sin and rebellion that initially led to their scattering. The text explains that the adversary's power, gained through transgression, is completely overturned by the Redeemer's obedience. This in turn frees the prey, the people of Israel, from that grip.
So it's a spiritual victory paving the way for physical and national restoration.
Exactly.
Now let's zero in on the 10 tribes exile under Assyria. What does Simon tell us about their immediate fate and any subsequent actions they took?
This is a pivotal moment in her argument. The text proposes that after their exile, the 10 tribes, having seen the Assyrians' idolatry firsthand, developed a deep aversion to such practices.
A real distaste for it, right?
Yeah, and they feared incurring more divine wrath. They wanted to protect their descendants from what they called the seducing and mortal sin of idolatry. So they made this conscious decision to migrate, to move further away from Assyrian influence.
A deliberate separation.
Yes. And Simon cites 2 Esdras 13:40-36, which describes them finding a narrow passage through the Euphrates River.
Oh.
And traveling for a year and a half to this place called Arsareth, believed to be somewhere in Armenia. There they could observe laws they hadn't kept in their own land.
So it was a proactive move, driven by their desire to preserve their faith.
Absolutely.
So where was this Assyrian empire situated in relation to this supposed journey to Arsareth?
Simon explains that the land they traveled through was originally assigned to Ashur, a son of Shem.
Oh, I see.
This was after Babel, of course. But this land had been taken over by Nimrod, a descendant of Cush. So the Assyrian Empire was sometimes referred to as Ashur and sometimes as Cush, which often gets translated as Ethiopia in some Bible versions.
Interesting. So it had this dual identity, in a way.
That's right.
And Simon also points out that this empire, powerful as it was, didn't last that long.
Right, it was destined to crumble.
Now, about the timeline of those Assyrian conquests and the exile of the 10 tribes, were there distinct phases to this?
Yes, definitely. Simon outlines 3 major Assyrian conquests that impacted the northern kingdom of Israel. The most significant one, the final blow, was when Esarhaddon conquered Samaria in 678 BC. That's when the remaining 10 tribes were exiled, except for a small number who stayed behind, maybe about 600, according to Josephus.
Okay.
And Simon emphasizes that these final exiles, they weren't as attached to the land as previous generations.
More mobile.
Yes. And she suggests that they were the ones who embarked on that journey to Arsareth. They were looking for a fresh start, a chance to practice their faith freely.
So they were spiritually motivated.
Precise.
Now, Simon brings in some observations from Dr. Elias Boudinot. What did he add to this whole line of inquiry?
Boudinot, who was writing much later, offered a really interesting theory about where the 10 tribes initially settled after their exile. He believed they went to a place that was sparsely populated, far north of what most people thought. And he suggests they grew considerably in number before eventually migrating further north and west.
So a thriving community in an unexpected location.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that Boudinot claimed that even in his time, centuries later, some geographical names still bore traces of those lost tribes.
You're kidding.
Yeah, he pointed to Samarkand as possibly being derived from Samaria. He even claimed there was a Mount Tabor and a Jericho on the Arden River near the Caspian Sea.
Wow.
And he even connected a group of Tartar chiefs known as Morsois with the name Moses.
So these potential linguistic and geographical echoes scattered across time and space are pretty tantalizing, right?
Definitely adds a layer of mystery to the whole thing.
Now, Simon also discusses the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. Why is this important when talking about the 10 tribes who were all part of the northern kingdom?
Right, so Jacob adopted his grandsons Ephraim and Manasseh, making them equal to his own sons Reuben and Simeon. And the blessing he bestowed upon Joseph was profound. He said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God who sustained me all my life unto this day, the angel who redeemed me from all evil, bless the youths, and let my name be named upon them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. This act basically guaranteed that Joseph's lineage, through Ephraim and Manasseh, would remain prominent within Israel, even after the kingdom split.
So they inherited this powerful blessing, this legacy.
Exactly. And this becomes crucial when you're trying to trace those lost tribes, because the names of Ephraim and Manasseh pop up a lot in prophecies about Israel's future.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it suggests that their destiny was interwoven with the destiny of the whole nation.
Now, Simon also uses some very vivid imagery when discussing the themes of divine judgment and future restoration. What are some of the key images she pulls from those prophetic texts?
The prophecies paint this striking contrast between suffering and hope. On one hand, you have the image of a people of strength meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have invaded, depicting this overwhelming oppression and displacement.
So it's bleak, desolate.
Yeah, but then there's this powerful shift. The Lord lifting a signal on the mountains and sounding a trumpet, announcing divine intervention, a reversal of fortune.
A beacon of hope.
And Jeremiah even prophesies, houses and fields and vineyards shall again be bought in this land, pointing to a restoration of their ancestral inheritance, a return to prosperity in their homeland.
It's almost like a reset, a chance to rebuild.
Exactly.
And Simon also highlights Jeremiah's own experience during the fall of Jerusalem. How does she frame that?
Oh, that's a powerful story. Jeremiah was clearly devastated by the fall of Jerusalem to the Chaldeans.
Understandably so.
Yeah. He laments, behold, the siege mounds have come up to the city to take it, and the city has been given into the hand of the Chaldeans who fight against it, because of the sword and famine and pestilence. What you have spoken has happened. Indeed, you see it. But even in the midst of that destruction and despair, God tells him to do something that seems completely counterintuitive.
What was that?
He says, buy fields for money and take witnesses, although the city has been given into the hand of the Chaldeans. So here he is, witnessing the downfall of his city, and he's told to invest in its future.
Wow.
It's an act of radical faith, a testament to the enduring promise of restoration.
Now, Simon also delves into the numerous prophecies about the future gathering and restoration of Israel. What are some of the key details she emphasizes?
These prophecies offer a sweeping vision of renewal and homecoming. Simon points to passages where the Lord promises to be seen over his people, his arrow going forth like lightning, the trumpet of Jubilee sounding, heralding liberation. Judah will be strengthened, and Joseph, representing the northern kingdom, will be redeemed.
So, a reunification.
Yes, exactly. They'll be scattered, sown among the peoples, but they'll remember the Lord, even in distant lands, and ultimately return. There's even talk of a second Exodus, a gathering from Egypt and Assyria to Gilead and Lebanon. The imagery is incredible, with the Euphrates River drying up, Assyria humbled, and God's people rejoicing and finding strength in him.
It's like this grand symphony of redemption.
Absolutely.
Now, Simon introduces this really intriguing and often debated aspect, the observations of early Spanish writers who saw potential parallels between the lost tribes and the inhabitants of the New World. What did they observe?
This is where things get really fascinating. These Spanish chroniclers, many of them religious figures, some maybe with Hebrew ancestry themselves, documented a whole bunch of striking similarities between the customs, practices, and even beliefs of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and what they knew from the Hebrew Bible and Jewish tradition.
So they were seeing echoes of ancient Israel in a completely unexpected place.
Exactly. But their interpretations of these parallels, well, they differed wildly. Some believed it was clear evidence that the Native Americans were descendants of those lost tribes, having migrated across the world centuries earlier.
Lost and found.
Right. But others, especially those who were deeply invested in the theological uniqueness of Jewish history, attributed those similarities to, well, to the work of Satan.
Oh, wow.
They saw it as the devil trying to create counterfeit versions of Hebrew traditions among a people he'd chosen as his own.
So you have these two radically different interpretations, one grounded in history and migration, the other in spiritual warfare.
Exactly.
Now, were those observations and the theories surrounding them openly discussed and published at the time?
Well, Simon suggests there was a lot of suppression going on. There was a hesitancy to publish works that strongly advocated for a Hebrew origin of the Native Americans, especially writings by figures like Bartolomé de las Casas and Bernardino de Sahagún, who were meticulous in their documentation of indigenous cultures.
So a deliberate silencing.
Yeah, potentially. And the reasons for that could be complex. Maybe there was a fear of challenging the accepted religious doctrines about the Jewish diaspora. Or perhaps it was tied to the Spanish conquest, a desire to maintain a clear separation between the colonizers and the colonized. The Council of the Indies, which controlled what was published about the Americas, is mentioned as having imposed strict censorship.
So it was a controlled narrative.
It seems so.
Now, despite that potential suppression, what were some of the views expressed by prominent figures like Garcia?
Well, Garcia, who was the confessor to Emperor Charles V, and Gomara, the chaplain of Hernan Cortes, they were both careful about how they wrote about Mexican customs, especially those they considered superstitious. But Simon points out that Garcia, in his work on the origin of the Indians, explicitly stated that many Spaniards living in the Indies believed those indigenous people were indeed descendants of the 10 tribes.
So it was a widely held belief, despite any official attempts to discourage it.
Exactly. People on the ground witnessing those cultural similarities firsthand were drawing their own conclusions.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of those observed parallels. Simon provides a pretty extensive list. What were some of the most striking resemblances between Jewish and Native American practices?
The list is long and covers so many aspects of life. Both cultures tracked time by the moon, offered the first fruits of their harvests, and celebrated a festival resembling the Feast of Tabernacles. Some Native American traditions even had altars made of 12 stones, echoing biblical accounts. They also observed mourning periods lasting a year, had comparable customs and roles for women, and spoke languages that some perceived as having a similar concise and expressive quality to Hebrew.
So many parallels.
Yes. And there's more. The idea of migrating to an uncultivated land, the widespread belief in a great flood, and the practice of circumcision in some regions of the Americas were also noted. While their sacrificial rituals weren't identical, there were significant analogies. Then there's the practice of carrying ark-like structures during migrations, the occurrence of miraculous events during those journeys that resemble the manna and water from the rock in Exodus, and the use of names and titles for the Creator that had phonetic similarities to Hebrew terms. And perhaps most astonishingly, some chroniclers documented beliefs that mirrored the concepts of incarnation, redemption through suffering and death, burial, descent into an underworld, resurrection, and ascension.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
I know, and it doesn't stop there. Similarities were observed in their forms of theocratic government, in their naming ceremonies for infants, in the dedication of children to temples or specific professions, in their moral teachings, and even in the practices of their royalty and priesthood, including how they presided over sacrifices, their use of anointing oil, their specific insignia, and the ritualistic tearing of garments.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack.
Right. And there's even more. The use of tassels on foreheads as royal symbols, adornments that look like phylacteries, the concept of cities of refuge, offerings similar to showbread, tabernacle-like structures built on mountains for festivals, stone tables with carvings thought to resemble Jewish figures, head coverings reminiscent of Aaron's, the wearing of fringes on clothing.
It's like they were ticking off every box.
I know. They even had an aversion to certain animals like pigs and birds of prey, concepts of ritual uncleanness and purification rites, mourning customs involving wailing and specific attire, the importance placed on dreams and visions, the practice of sweeping houses as a form of purification, and an annual ceremony where 12 men were chosen for a ritual involving deer and stones arranged like an altar. And there were even ceremonies involving the consumption of dough that resembled communion.
It's overwhelming. It's hard to dismiss all that as mere coincidence, isn't it?
It really is.
And then, of course, there's a whole discussion about Quetzalcoatl. How does he fit into this framework of Hebrew connections?
Quetzalcoatl is a key figure in this whole debate. Simon highlights the stories about him, especially the belief that he was both divine and human, and that he came to redeem humanity from evil. That immediately draws parallels to the Messiah in Jewish and Christian thought. And the beliefs associated with Quetzalcoatl, like his incarnation, his suffering and death as a second Adam, his burial, his descent into the underworld, his resurrection, his ascension, and the expectation of his return, are all eerily similar to the narratives about the Messiah. And the stories about him leaving eastward toward the Red Sea and the hope for his return only make the connection stronger.
It's like a mirror image, almost.
Right.
Simon also mentions a theocratic nature of government among those indigenous peoples. What were the hallmarks of that?
Their government was based on a deep belief in a supreme creator, known by various names but always associated with greatness and eternity. They believed that their earthly rulers should emulate that divine rule. And the idea that the soul was immortal was central to their worldview. They also had this tradition about the earth being covered by water in a flood, though not completely destroyed. And they often saw themselves as a chosen people, guided by the deity and his prophets, in contrast to other nations.
A sense of divine election and destiny, just like ancient Israel.
Precisely.
Now, Simon briefly compares those Mesoamerican cultures to other ancient civilizations, like the Egyptians, noting things like the pyramids and the use of arches. What's the point of those comparisons?
It challenges the idea that all these similarities are just satanic mimicry. If the devil was trying to copy Hebrew traditions, why include things like pyramids, which weren't unique to the Hebrews, or arches, which weren't prominent in descriptions of ancient Israelite architecture? Those broader parallels suggest that maybe these cultures shared ancient roots, predating their divergence, or that maybe similar ideas can develop independently due to universal human experiences.
So it expands the possibilities beyond a single source of influence.
Exactly.
Now, the Inca traditions also have some interesting parallels, as Simon points out. What were some of the key echoes in their stories?
The Incas, like other Mesoamerican cultures, had stories about a great flood covering the earth. They also revered a divine spirit among their ancestors who could predict the future and control nature. And their origin story involved a major migration that included crossing a narrow, icy body of water. Some people speculate that could be a distant memory of crossing the Bering Strait.
So those themes of a global flood and a challenging journey are pretty universal, it seems.
They really are.
Finally, Simon talks about the Spanish arrival and Montezuma's reaction. How does that tie into the prophecies and traditions we've been discussing?
Montezuma apparently knew about a prophecy foretelling the arrival of strangers from the east, and his initial reaction to the Spanish was actually somewhat welcoming. He exchanged gifts with Cortés and may have even believed that Cortés was the returning Quetzalcoatl.
Wow.
Yeah, it suggests that he have a framework of expectation based on those ancient prophecies. But the Spanish, they resorted to deception and violence, trying to instill fear, and that led to Montezuma's downfall and death. The tragic clash of cultures and expectations, possibly driven by a misinterpretation of prophecy.
A sobering reminder of how history can take unexpected turns.
Absolutely.
Now, Simon wraps up by mentioning some linguistic connections between certain Native American languages and Hebrew. What were those similarities?
Apparently, some researchers have found structural similarities. Things like the lack of superlative degrees and adjectives, and the way certain words carry specific religious or symbolic meanings. These observations, while needing more in-depth linguistic analysis, hint at the possibility of ancient connections between these geographically distant languages.
So even the languages themselves might hold clues to those lost connections.
It's possible.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into Barbara Simon's The 10 Tribes of Israel Historically Identified, we've covered a lot of ground. It's been a fascinating journey exploring potential links between the lost tribes and various ancient cultures, especially in the Americas. Simon's work presents a compelling case, with all those parallels in customs, traditions, and even prophetic narratives, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, there are echoes of ancient Israel reverberating across time and continents.
It really is mind-boggling when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our listeners, this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you're intrigued by these ideas, we encourage you to dive deeper into Simon's book and explore the works of those other historians and chroniclers she mentions, like Josephus, Boudinot, Torquemeda, Acosta, Garcia, Las Casas, and so many others. It's a journey of discovery that can last a lifetime.
Definitely. And it raises some profound questions. If, as Simon and these historical accounts suggest, there are echoes of those ancient Israelites in cultures so far removed in time and space, what other hidden connections might we find if we keep searching? What other stories are waiting to be unearthed? And how might those discoveries change our understanding of human history, cultural transmission, and even our own identities?
Those are great questions to ponder. And if you've enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to subscribe to the English BookCast for more deep dives into fascinating books. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.